And the first one will be by Konstantin Ocheretyany. I am so sorry for butchering your name. From Interactivity to Intersensitivity, Sympathetical Apperception in Computer Games. Konstantin, please.
Yes, thank you very much for your introduction. And I'm sorry because I don't understand what language should I use. Should I speak Russian or should I use English? First of all, I would like to.
Sorry to interrupt you, but it's a mixed language area. So if it's best for you to speak Russian, so please do Russian, because we have translation anyway.
We have a translation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Which are in Russian will be translated into English, and the papers which are English which will be translated into Russian.
So okay, when I switch Russian. Добрый день, уважаемые
Hello, everyone, dear colleagues. I am delighted to participate in this conference, even though there are certain difficulties with this format. I think a couple of days prior to the conference, I learned that the dates of the other conference were changed. So I had to go to Khabarovsk. I had the overlapping of two conferences and also had to adjust the schedule. And there is the big time difference between Moscow and Khabarovsk. I have to be on my phone in a hotel. And then I also have some problems with my body because it also has to adjust to a different time zone. So if I'm not very clear in my talk, I really beg you to forgive me, because I couldn't guess that there will be such an overlap. I would like to thank the organizers for an opportunity to give this talk. I'd like to thank them for selecting participants. I've heard a lot of them before, and I know that they are good researchers. I know that their talks are always of high quality. Today, I would like to speak about the origins of the issue of care in philosophy, because we often interpret it in a very limited way. And I think that we could broaden the scope, and that would be useful for video games. We traditionally view this issue through Heidegger and his passage on care in being and time. Michel Foucault is another thinker that we are talking about when we think about care. Following Foucault, we associate the matter of care with late antiquity or early Christianity. Therefore, the Judeo-Christian context sort of escapes us. The issues that were elaborated in early 20th century by such theologians as Martin Buber or Rosenzweig, this issue entered back through Levinas and Derrida into contemporary thought. Quite often we don't see this trace, we overlook it, but care could be viewed through the lens of sensitivity, because we always think about care, or we tend to think about care as about control or something related to power or objectifying relation. But another alternative that I just mentioned might empower us to think about trust as a trace of the other, of some other being that a godly being that touches us in a certain way. For computer games, we are very used to speak about action in games through management and control. So we sort of apply the matrix or a configuration that was laid back in 1947 when Van der Bush, a person who was really close to the defense system of the United States, he wrote in Atlantic Monthly on how we could think. So in that article, he is giving us some working hypotheses or metaphors that could change the behavior of a human being for them to become more operative, efficient, working better with different tables and images. There was the time when the contemporary interface was formed, at least theoretically. This sketch had its philosophical ground. It was rooted in behavioral psychology. Through it, the metaphor of this tabletop was elaborated. When we are facing the interface, we always see the desktop. We understand that in video games, it is the only kind of action that where all results we achieve come back. In social life, the situation is different. We don't always see the results of our actions. We don't know what happens to them. But in video games, we are expecting a response. I think that this response could be used as a genuine resource of this media. Because other media might give us a certain way of interaction, but in a video game, openness and sensitivity could be viewed as a different matter. For Martin Buber, the world, it turns into a reality that it is directed to us. It's a dialogical reality, a reality of the thou. And the later games that we have seen that have emerged, we can observe this kind of phenomena. There's different approach to games. For example, maybe you remember the remark by Warren Spector, an author of the game System Shock and Deus Ex, as well as the TIFF series. He's one of the people who is responsible for the genre of immersive theme. He expressed his critical assessment of the opened world. He saw this kind of worlds where everything can be done in any way you like. These were the worlds that he sort of didn't believe could be useful for us because there are very limited mechanics. There was the question of the crisis of interactivity in the open worlds. If we can interact with everything, then this everything is something that repeats all the time.
Куда двигаться дальше, если
So where can we go from here when we are experiencing the crisis of interaction? When this model of control doesn't work anymore, when the categories related to power and cognition that were related to the behavioral models are not relevant anymore. It seems that reward system doesn't work today. So what can we do? How can we increase the sense of pleasure instead of the sense of estrangement or alienation? What we could do is to narrow the scope of possibilities instead of broadening it. So here we might think about the sublime. Sublime is something that is related to antiquity. We always, who comes up in this is also Kant, this moral and aesthetical unity of his system. Well, we could choose a different path, because Kant was also under the influence of the Judeo-Christianic tradition. So we can say that this issue of care has become particularly important, though it turned into a sort of technology. It seems to have become a material force instead of a spiritual one. Therefore, I think that we could use some theological models today to interpret the games today. Sublime is a quasi-theological term, notion, that goes back to the book of Jacob, where God expresses his view on the human being when he deprives Job of everything. So the model of interaction might make us think about this intervention or intrusion of the sublime when we lose control of the situation, when the only thing that is left is to experience the vanity of one's attempts to do something. So this kind of intersensitivity, this feeling of the impossibility of action, is the only kind of experience that we might have, but it gives us more, because we are not simply changing something in the world of the game, but there are changes in the subject through care, because they have to reassess their value system. I'm using a monoblock right now. I'm really, really sorry that I can't show you the examples, but I think they are so general that you'll definitely remember, and I'm not going to spoil anything for you because these games were released a long time ago. If you remember of part 5 of Metal Gear Solid, the Phantom Pain, you will remember one important issue there. Since the game had a component where you had to build your own base. And this base was built through your efforts, through the tasks that you carried out, and your wish to take revenge. So this base was the center of evil, but you invested all of your efforts into it because you looked at it from a different angle. And what the player did not expect in this game, because they had to counterpose the interventions from other worlds where other players built their own bases. So at a certain point of time, your base was overtaken by other soldiers, and then an epidemic breaks out, and you don't know what are the sources of these epidemics. This epidemics is something that spreads through language, but you yourself, first of all, didn't know about this, and you couldn't find what language was the source of the virus. It was really hard to detect that the language itself was the source of the epidemic. All of a sudden, the player was made to destroy the population of their own base. Those people you selected, where you could come back, your home. So the overall playing cycle was organized around this base, where you could come back, take a shower, relax, etc. Or maybe fulfill some quests. And then you, the player, are forced to kill your own population. Another example, even though there were some spoilers, I think. So I'm going to speak about the game The Last of Us Part 2. At a certain moment, when you think that you've already completed the game, you begin to play for a character with whom it's very difficult to empathize. So you take the side of your enemies. You have to establish emotional ties with them. And an example that's been discussed broadly was that some really banal situations, some game design tropes, were returned to us in a new way. For instance, a dog, the German Shepherd, for instance, which is viewed as an enemy, as an enemy that should be destroyed. These dogs have names. So you're killing this dog right away, and you hear some horrible screams of a woman, and then you kill that woman, and then you move on through the gameplay. In the second part of this game, you begin by playing with the dog, with this German Shepherd. You see that what this dog eats, you can communicate with this dog, you can pat it, you can touch it. So you are brought back into the past when this dog was still alive. So at that moment, you see your actions differently, and you feel that you're sort of devastated. So this game also works with this change of perspective, this ethical aspect. In this regard, the crisis of interactivity, of open worlds, bring us to the issue of the new. How we are not asking how to make something in greater quality, but how to make it really touch us. Because here the game connects two very important feelings. In the digital reality, we can speak about anything, we can think about anything. We can move from a page to a page, from an icon to an icon. We can give likes to things. We can click on our computer. We can use touch screen. We can phenomenologically touch anything. And yet it doesn't touch us. We're sort of gliding on top of everything. We are surfing through it, but we are not touched by anything. In a lot of things in our everyday life, we neither can't influence the flow of things, be that for reasons of bureaucracy, the market, the production, social and political institutions. So the feeling of estrangement and alienation is growing, but we can't respond to it. Therefore, phenomenologically and ethically, these two gestures are being separated, touching something and being touched. The instrument that is given to us by computer games is the language that can unite these two aspects. So the touch and being touch. The game that provoked clicking on things, pressing buttons, and exploring through stimulation of our search for the new, returns to us this dialogical format, the dialogue where a touch corresponds to sensitivity. In this way, the link is being restored, the connection is being restored. I'm calling it a sympathetical apperception, the link between the touch and sensitivity, something that might have seemed to be lost. And therefore, the games might turn in a real technique for the care of the self. So therefore, I think Martin Buber could be very useful here, because his philosophy allows us to reevaluate our approach to care that is often based on Heidegger or Foucault or Agamben. Maybe we should make a step back. We should go back to the modernist tradition, to tradition of Martin Buber and Levinas, so that we can raise these important issues once again: touch, sensitivity, trace, as the presence of something through its absence. So these three problems, the trace, the touch, and sensitivity, form the most relevant discourse of the game problematics and gives us the relevant experience. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them.
Thank you very much, Konstantin. That was impressive. Just, you know, out of your head in a hotel room under these very bad circumstances. Thank you very much. That was very much food for thought. Are there questions from the audience? Please give me a sign in the chat or raise your digital hand, switch on your video. While we're waiting, maybe I can ask a quick question. You talked as one of your central examples about Metal Gear Solid 5 and that very intense episode where we're asked to shoot some of our soldiers because they have become infected. And you have stressed that it's very much about the game touching us as the players. And I'm just wondering how you think about these strategies of the Metal Gear games to always distance the player also from the game and the gameplay. Like in Metal Gear Solid 5 at the very end, we find out that we have not played Snake, but an imposter of Snake, right? And we of course know that we are not Snake, but just the player. So when we have games that actually do this form of alienation, defamiliarization, is that something that you think is in conflict with this emotional connection, or does it even somehow support this?
Спасибо большое за.
Thank you very much.
Indeed, it seemed to be right at the final of the game when you discover that you are not Solid, but you indeed Venom Snake. It seems to be what you feel confused, you feel maybe something like sorrow because indeed I think that I was this big boss and I was not. However, it's a very strong. It's not Ludon narrative dissonance. It's a very strong scene. It's a very strong situation because you, as a player, matter so like the main protagonist or an antagonist of the game. You're so important like all our characters, and I think it was a Kojima genius decision to include player in game totally, and all series of Metal Gear now can be a look at a different view. I think it was a very strong decision by Kojima.
Yes, thank you very much. We have one more question from Feng.
Hi, Konstantin. That was a really fascinating talk. Thanks very much. I really like the direction that you went in and the whole kind of theological angle I thought was very interesting. I have a kind of question, maybe a comment, because you obviously posed this against Heidegger and Foucault. And I think, when Foucault talks about care of the self in antiquity, it's often understood as a form of self-mastery. master yourself in order to master others, and so on. But you talk about this differentiation between sensitivity and control, and I think that's interesting. But I think the two are also bound up together. So there's sensitivity in order to attain control, you could say. So these practices of the self from antiquity, there's, for example, what Socrates talks about, the art of rhetoric and being able to be free from rhetorical manipulation, which is a form of self-mastery or control, you could say. But there's also aspects of, like, for example, hyperneumata, keeping journals, reflecting on your activities at the end of the day, which is a sort of sensitivity, you could say. And there's another angle, which is homologomenos, the kind of harmony, this oneness with the cosmos and with nature, that was really emphasized. So that's something of a kind of surrender of control, perhaps. So I guess my point is that maybe there's, in order to arrive at any degree of control, if we want to put it like that, there's also got to be sensitivity bound into it in some way. So then how is it possible to say, to prefer one or over the other? And then the kind of the other thought I had, which followed on from this, is from your game examples, where you talk about these cases of the impossibility of action. But what about going the other way, just as a kind of thought experiment? What about making it so that the player ends up with a kind of total form of control, so that they are able to do everything, and then it becomes maybe a bit absurd or meaningless? Isn't that also going to kind of produce an interesting result? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Frank. I'm glad to see you here. You asked very interesting questions, and very difficult will be to answer, because it's a question of measure or a question of decision. Control, indeed, very important. All games based on the control, all games based on decision that player makes. However, the lack of control in Metal Gear or in Last of Us was very strong and interesting decision. But as for me, and for my theory, it is a very hard question for answer, how use this proportion between actions and lack of actions, between decisions that player makes and impossibility to act. How mixed these two ways, actions and unaction. I don't know exactly how to create this proportion, this opposition to force player to live through some situations. However, I think it one of the ways to resolve crisis of interactivity, when you can make what you want, but it means nothing for you. So I think it's a very hard question for game designers, how to create this proportion to and it is a question of investigation of human psychology, of human nature, of nature of sense and meaning for us. I think it's a new way to understand games, and it is very important for philosophy, for example, because it creates a situation when games become not object but subject. It gives something to philosophy. Games become laboratories in some sense of investigating of our nature, of our feeling, decision making. So I think it's a very important but very new field, and the name of our conference show it.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Thank you, Konstantin. Thank you, Feng, for that very good and deep question. Thank you so much for your talk.